Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. There we go, 6 o'clock, and we're all here, except one apology. Domestic issues, as you can see up on the screen there are no fire alarms scheduled, but if there is one, then follow the instructions and we gather at the appointed place. I've asked the indulgence of some colleagues already, and I'd like to, just before we start the meeting proper, can I... one of our members has got an important birthday coming up at the weekend, so I would just like to give her a little gift, if I may. Thank you, Councillor Swindle. That'll teach me to forget to buy a card. Enough. Oh. Welcome, colleagues. Thank you for being so prompt. And thank you for your indulgence. Just try and get the minutes up. Yeah. Apologies. We have apologies from Councillor Cruz. Is that it? Anybody else? No? Fine. Item 2 is public participation. I don't believe that we have any. Don't seem to be any of the members of the public here. Moving on to item 3. I have here a copy of the minutes of the last meeting. We need to propose and second that they're a true and accurate record. Could I have a proposer, please? It's been proposed by Councillor Swindell, seconded by Councillor Morley. Interests. Do any members have any interests which they would like to declare or need to declare? Oh, forgive me, I did that again. I was out of practice. Can we vote on the minutes? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks, Lee. Beg your pardon. There's one abstention. Did you get that abstention? Yeah. Beg your pardon. We are now then into the agenda proper. Didn't hear any. No hands went up. No. Item 5, the review of the gambling statement of principles licensing is on page 3 to 34. I don't think I need to read it out. We've all got copies of the agendas, have we not? Thank you. In that case, I'd like to hand over to Eileen, please.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, everybody. So, as the report says, this report is to provide the committee with an update on the 3-yearly formal review of the Council's licensing policy in relation to gambling. So, the Gambling Act 2005 requires councils to prepare and republish a licensing policy statement of principles every 3 years. This has been the case since the policy was first introduced in 2007. The statement sets out how this authority will exercise its functions under the Gambling Act and the principles it intends to apply in determining applications and carrying out enforcement. It will also provide clarity for licensing applicants and for local residents and businesses in the area. So the current policy document was reviewed by officers in line with guidance from the Gambling Commission last April, and at a meeting of this committee, a draft policy document was considered and approved for further consultation. At that time, the only revisions considered necessary to the current gambling licensing policy were administrative and didn't affect the principles of the policy, the existing policy, but it did ensure that that policy is kept up to date. Policy has now been considered by other relevant statutory authorities and bodies, and no comments have been made that require any changes to the document. In Derbyshire Dales, the small number of licensed premises under this Act back in 2007 has reduced even further, with 2 betting shops having closed down during the last 3 years since this policy was last reviewed. This leaves us with 2 other betting shops, 4 family entertainment arcades and 1 adult gaming centre, which is an amusement arcade, where the stakes and prizes of the machines are higher than those in a family entertainment centre. So as you can see, we really have only got a handful of licensed premises under the Act. So in practice, it's considered that the Council's policy has worked fairly well. Although we only have a small number of licensed premises, there haven't been any significant issues raised or any complaints received that would compromise the Council's policy, or that we believe would compromise the Council's policy. So the report is just to update members on the action taken since the last meeting, and to remind the committee that provisions of the Gambling Act 2005 do require this policy document to be referred to a meeting of the full Council for consideration before it can be approved for republishing for a further 3 years. So that's all I've got to say, really, Chair. I mean, if there are any questions, I'm happy to take them, but the officer recommendation is that the draft policy document is reported to full Council at the end of this month, with a view to republishing for the next 3 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Eileen. The recommendations are there before you, members. Do we have anybody who would like to speak to them? Councillor Allison.
Thank you. I've just got a question, I think, and I'm sure you probably told us this before, Eileen, but where does raffles fit into the gambling licensing regime? And sort of, you know, I'm thinking about things that PTAs run, that sort of thing.
Okay. So raffles are not covered by the Gambling Act. They're covered, well, they are covered by the Gambling Act, but they're actually classed as a small society lottery. So basically, PTAs and churches and other charities, small charities, will apply for an annual small society lottery registration, and that will allow them then to run raffles throughout the year. They pay an application fee. I think it's £40. It's set in statute. We can't change that. And when they renew it for £20.
Is that information available on a council website somewhere?
It should be, and if it isn't, then I'll make sure it is.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, moving on. Over to you. Yes, sure. I mean, when the policy was first introduced back in 2007, we did a wide consultation with all the people specified or recommended in the Act, and I think they're on the last page of our policy document as well. Since then, we've reviewed the policy, but we've stuck to the main consultees, which are the responsible authorities, the Gambling Commission, the responsible authorities, and the general public, rather than all the parish councils, etc., because there are no changes to the policy. Oh, sorry, yes, and the licence holders, those 8 licence holders, yes, sorry. Is that okay? Oh, we'll use that. So it's no more questions. So we need someone to move it and someone to second it then. Councillor Elliott's moved it and Councillor Wakeman has seconded it. Thank you. That's approved. Oh, here we go again. We'd better vote on it, hadn't we? Since we're here in a democracy. Can I have a show of hands all in favour? Any against? And any abstentions? Unanimous. Thank you. moving on. This is item on your agenda, item 6, and it's the Licensing and Appeals Subcommittee Procedures. And Lee, our colleague, is going to take this one. Over to you, Lee.
Thank you, Chair. As members will know, we had quite an interesting debate at last committee over these, and a request was for me to take them away and work on them and try and make them slightly clearer. I've done that, and as you well know, I've emailed those around to members for comments prior to this committee, and I had two very helpful comments come back from Councillor Gamble and Councillor Allison. I've put a page on your on the desk in front of you. I've not reprinted all of the minutes, but I've just looked at the last 3 clauses of the first 3 procedures that I had, which was causing us the issues. Where I think I'd gone wrong, members, is I tried to explain the justification of in the procedures of why we needed to do it this way, and I think that's where it caused some confusion. So I cut it down to very basic of what we were going to do. Now, just to run through the issues raised by Councillor Gamble and Councillor Allison was, well, how do we let applicants know how long they've got to speak? And speaking to our democratic services officers, it's been decided that maybe the best way to do this was actually to move forward our pre-meet. So where we would normally have a pre-meet before, we would actually, as soon as we've got all the responses for how many people we want to speak at that committee, we can then have a pre-meet. We can then consider how we want that committee to run. We can consider whether or not members would like a site visit. And then we can decide then, and after that meeting, we can then email all of those people that says they want to speak and the applicant to say, we have decided that we will be giving you 3 minutes or we won't be applying the relevant time limit. We felt that was the best way forward to try and explain that in the procedure, but if we do that at the back as well, that would help. We'd also figure out if there's any conflicts of interest that we might have a problem with members having to step out as well. So we can sort all that out good time, let everybody know when they need to and how the meeting will run and how much time they will have. That was the best way we considered around that. The other main issue was about that was raised about how long do we give ward councillors to or how long would we expect notice from ward councillors to the committee to say they want to speak. Again, to try and put a strict time limit, you must do it by 10 working days or whatever, then that restricts the issue of when we send out the notice, because we have to send it out 10 days before, but that's a basic minimum. We could get it out earlier if we want, and therefore that's restricting the time that we have to hold the meeting. So we felt the best way forward again is when we notify ward members that there is a hearing regarding a premises in their ward, we would say to them, like we would to anyone else making representations, please let us know by X date if you want to speak. So when we have the pre-meet, we can decide how much time to give everyone. That was the way round we felt of doing that, and I've sort of made it clarification in there. Also, Councillor Gamble raised the point of, would it be the number of people that's asked to speak or whether it's the number of people that turned up? Which is actually quite a valid question. If you're doing it on the day, it's quite easy, but if you're trying to give everyone notice beforehand, I've decided that the best way to do it is on the people that has notified us that they wish to speak. The reason behind that is, one, I think that's defendable on an appeal. Also, you can't be asking one party that they have half an hour to make a speech. They've prepared that, and on the day only half of the other representatives turn up, and you're saying you need to cut your speech down by half. That would be unfair. So we will work it out on the basis of how many people have given notice that they want to speak. So that's how I've worded it. I'm open for any comments or discussions, but we felt that was the best way, which gives us a chance to organise everything and also notify everyone of how the hearing will be conducted. Because also the other consideration is normally the chair is not elected until the day of the committee. So we can't really put any procedure of we will get the information information and then liaise with the chair, because the chair of the subcommittee hasn't been appointed. So that's why we thought the members' meeting with everyone that's due to attend that committee, and we can discuss the issues there. And happy for any questions, and I can see Councillor Gamble is there.
Councillor Gamble, over to you.
It is just purely procedural and administrative. I can see the point about the pre-meet. Unless I'm just being really stupid, I can't see particularly where it's here in what we're actually going to vote on. Does it need to be? Or?
Thank you, Councillor Gamble. I'm glad you clarified that, but no, because this is the procedure for the hearing. Everything that I've said about
pre-meet.
The pre-meet would be the procedure for us to arrange the committee.
Right. Did we always have pre-meet? I'm completely new to this, you see. I've never seen one before.
The pre-meet is usually held literally half an hour before the committee.
Oh, it's not a new thing to have a pre-meet.
No,
right, okay, thank you.
Let's just say it's very normal to have the pre-meet to go through what evidence we have there, and we still might need a mini pre-meet because you might get late information. Unfortunately, the regulations say as long as they send information 24 hours before the hearing, we have to consider it, which is unreasonable when you have to notify a hearing 10 days before and provide committee papers before that. So there still might be the need for a small pre-meet before to just update members on anything that's developed.
Okay.
But generally, other committees, you have a pre-meet with the chair to arrange the running order, etc. of items. So there is no reason why we can't do that for a licensing subcommittee as well, to say, let's see how this is going to run.
And then just the other small administrative point, really. Obviously, this is a slight extension of points 3, 4 and 5. And I think these presumably then apply to the other meetings that then have to be added on. Are we? I'm just thinking in terms of what we actually pass when we vote, because of what's written on the thing. Will it be made clear that we are passing the new writing?
Yeah, so what you'll be asking on, there's 4 procedures, of which the first 3, the last 3 paragraphs are all worded the same, rather than print out a load.
Yeah,
so it will be to agree the 4 procedures with the first 3 with this amended wording.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. That's clarified that.
Are you happy with that, Councillor Gamble? Yeah. Do we have anybody else we should speak? Yes, Councillor Wayne.
Receiving over. That's good. Excellent. Just a bit of clarity, if I may. I think we said at the last meeting that if a ward councillor speaks on behalf of a member of the subcommittee, you only get 3 minutes. Is that right?
Yes, they would.
And does that need clarifying there, or are we happy? Is it in anywhere else?
I decided not to put that in because, of course, if we're going to have that meeting and then decide, then when we notify everyone, then we can let them know how long the ward member would have.
Yeah. And the other thing that it says, when it says, so am I right in thinking that if we have a meeting and there's one person who's making an objection to it, the chair will decide how many minutes they have, or will it be 3 minutes? If it's 3 minutes, then is the agent or the applicant going to have that amount of time as well?
You have to give them the minimum amount of time. The example, I was having a word just beforehand with Councillor Gamble, and I use the example is if you go 3 minutes to 10 people that each raised a different point against, and then you only gave 3 minutes to the applicant to respond, that's 18 seconds per point, which is why the courts have said you've got to give them an equal amount of time. Again, if you've only got a few people speaking, the normal procedure is not to enforce 3 minutes, because the hearing, and it is under actual statutory instrument, the hearing regulations, they encourage that it's not adversarial, it's a sort of open table discussion to get issues out. The whole issue about this in the 3 minutes is when you have something like Darley Moor Dance Festival, where we had 32 objectors. If you try and have an open discussion there, you'd be there for forever. So there has to be some way of managing the hearing. But as I say, the general view and my advice would be in any committee that if there's only 2 or 3 objectors and the applicant, then don't enforce the time limit and let everyone have their say.
That's fine. Thanks. Thank you.
Happy with it. Back to you, Councillor.
Sorry, just a quick from that. Will the applicant be informed of that beforehand, or do they tend to be informed of that? I'm just thinking. I know we sort of know that we'll give them the benefit of the doubt and we'll get a bit longer. I'm just thinking, we're not going to have applicants coming along thinking they've only got 3 minutes because they've only been told there's only one person who's going to object.
Yeah, no, we would never say that. As I say, if it's one or two people, this is to try and deal with the situations where you have a lot of objectors and a lot of objectors which all have valid points, but most of them are raising the same issue again. That it's, for example, Darley Moor, it was noise nuisance a lot of the time and the disruption to their life, but it was all from different areas. So it's right to hear from them, but it was all noise nuisance. So it's just trying to manage that situation.
I know. But again, this is my trying to ask questions on something I've never even seen. I'm just generally speaking, applicants tend to know that they're going to be given a bit of leeway and they are going to be able to explain everything. Because obviously, I'm just thinking, there's someone coming in thinking they've got 3 minutes, it's not very long, is it?
No, but that's the issue. We'll try and do that at the pre-meet to sort of have it very clear. We have, for example, 10 applicants. We will give them all 3 minutes each. So, 10 objectors. We'll give them all 3 minutes each. So, applicant, please limit your comments to 30 minutes. That sort of is how we would then notify them.
Happy with that? Makes sense? Yeah. Do we have anybody else wishes to speak to this item? In that case, do we have someone who would like to move it? It has been moved by Councillor Elliott. Councillor Lee, sorry. It has been seconded by Councillor Morley. Can we have a vote, please? All in favour, please show. Any against? Any abstentions? That's passed as written. Next item, item 7 on your agenda, colleagues. It's the implementation of the National Taxi and Private Hire Vehicle Licensing Standards, a progress report. And Tim and Eileen, I believe, are going to double handle this one.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So Tim will speak to the issue regarding CCTV in licensed vehicles, which is the last officer recommendation 4. As the Chair says, this report provides the committee with a brief update on progress made since the last meeting in implementing the requirements of the DFT's National Taxi and Private Hire Vehicle Licensing Standards. It also seeks approval to review and update the Council's current taxi and PHV licensing policy to take account of any recommendations or comments received from the taxi and PH trade and other relevant stakeholders. Now, currently there haven't been any specific comments received in relation to the introduction of these standards, detailed in the 10 bullet points on page 46 of your papers. But that aside, the introduction of the standards is seen as a way of improving public and driver safety, so it is recommended by us that the current policy is revised to include those changes, or to include changes to accommodate any of the standards that are not currently part of the Council's policy. It will then be necessary for that revised draft policy to be consulted on more widely. So that will give the trade, the taxi and PHV trade, another opportunity to comment before a final version of the taxi licensing policy is referred to full council for consideration to approve and republish. The current taxi licensing policy, some of you will remember, was approved in May 2018. So it is time really to do a review of that policy anyway. During the last few weeks, several driver operators have contacted me, but not about the national standards or the idea of including some more conditions within the policy, but regarding the setting of the maximum fares that they can charge their passengers. Now, we have discussed that here at a previous meeting prior to COVID, and there was approval given by the committee that we, as officers, should sit down with the trade and we should discuss how we could make increases to those to the maximum table of fares that they can charge. The last time there was an increase, it was 2011, so it's probably fair to say that review is well overdue. So in order to accommodate that, I've arranged a series of meetings to take place at the end of January, beginning of February, with the trade to discuss the fares, and at the same time it's suggested that I take the opportunity to discuss the national standards with them in person, just to make sure that the reason I haven't had any responses is because they're happy that these standards are going to form part of the policy, and you know, they haven't not responded for any other reason is what I'm after. So the meetings, I have got the meeting scheduled in my diary, but at the moment I'm not sure whether or not we'd be allowed to have them in proper person, or whether they'd have to be virtual, or whether they'd have to be a mixture of both. So I intend sending out some details of dates next week to the trade, and hopefully those meetings will be able to cover a variety of the issues included in this report, as well as the fares. I've tried in the bullet points on page 46 of your papers. I've tried where we're already doing something. I've tried to sort of highlight that, and where we're not, then obviously that's something that there will be a policy change. So any policy document, when it's reviewed, will have those changes, any changes actually highlighted, so everyone can see what it was before and what it's proposed it should be from whenever the policy is adopted. We do need to move on with these national standards. I mean, we were first informed of them by the DFT in 2020, October 2020. So we discussed them then at this committee, and we discussed them again, I think probably in April 21 and again in October 21. So we do need really to review our policy. That was the intention of the government. That all policies across the country would be reviewed to make sure that these standards are included, and if not, then you know, proper reason given for why they're not. And that's really all I've got to say about the first part, Chair. And if Tim wants to take over and do the CCTV bit.
I think it would make sense for Tim to carry straight on, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Those who were here will remember that we had an interesting, I thought, very worthwhile debate on the issue of CCTV and taxis. This is probably the most contentious is the wrong word, but the most difficult issue that's raised in the national standards. It's not about whether CCTV should be allowed in taxis, it's whether it should be mandatory, and all taxi operators and drivers should be required to provide them in a hackney carriage or a private hire vehicle. At the moment, our policy, in common with most other policies in the county and in the country, allows for the installation of CCTV, provided that it complies with data protection requirements, and offers drivers support in terms of our inspection regime, making sure they put it in properly. That CCTV remains the responsibility of the driver, and any data that he or she records as a part of the use of that equipment remains theirs. We as a council have no responsibility for it, although we may request it if there's been a problem. The national standards suggested that local authority, well, the national standards said that local authorities should consult to find out whether there are any local circumstances which would indicate that CCTV in taxis should be made mandatory or should not be made mandatory. It didn't say councils should make CCTV mandatory. It says we should try and find out whether there are any local circumstances that would support it or oppose it. At the last meeting, we had a discussion about that, and I think all members agreed that CCTV can have a very obvious public safety benefit. It could also increase confidence of people travelling in taxis. So what was agreed was that we would go out and consult with a selection of organisations, I suppose. Rather than carry out a general public consultation which would gain opinions, we would try and gain informed views, almost evidence, if you like, that would support, that would indicate whether or not CCTV should be made mandatory. So Eileen went and consulted with a number of, we all know the most important agency in relation to this is the police, but we consulted with a a range of authorities, a health and safety executive with insurance companies, of course with colleagues in the police, and we asked for their views, and we asked whether they had any evidence that would indicate that there was a benefit in making CCTV mandatory in taxis. You'll see from the report that we've had a very limited range of responses. It was only actually the health and safety executive who responded to say they hadn't really got any comment to make. We've had no comment as yet from the police in respect to this. Now, there are a number of ways of looking at that. We know that the licensing team at the police is under pressure in terms of staffing at the moment. But what I think it does indicate that the issue of CCTV in taxis in Derbyshire Dales, in our own locality, is not a high priority issue for them at the moment. That isn't the point. The view of officers is that this isn't a closed issue, that we should continue to talk to the police about this whole issue, talk to the insurance companies and talk to our drivers. We're going to raise it. We would suggest it's an item for discussion at the meetings Eileen has with the drivers and with the operators. But that at the moment there doesn't seem to be any evidence that would support the idea that we should make CCTV mandatory at this very moment. My view, as someone who's dealing with taxis for a number of years now, is that this isn't closed and we should carry on those conversations and we should continue to seek the views of the police. And if at any point they come up with the idea that actually there have been incidents in the Derbyshire Dales that would suggest that CCTV should be made mandatory for public safety reasons, then we should, of course, carry out that consultation and look to introduce that as a mandatory requirement. But at the moment, there isn't anything that we've got that would support that argument that you might loosely call evidence. That's the view of officers at this stage. It's not to say that we have all the wisdom on this, and it's clearly an item that caused some members some great degree of interest, quite rightly so, last time. So probably worth debate, I would have thought.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Did we give these agencies any deadline to respond to us?
Yeah, through you, Chair. Yes, the 12th of December. I think I may have put that in the report, or if I didn't, I meant to. But the 12th of December.
Right. So, is there any reason why you don't think they've even acknowledged any sort of response to us? I know HSE have come back and said they've got no comment, but why do you think that is?
I don't have any view on it. Sorry, I'm not on. Sorry. No, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, like Tim says, we do know that I send all my licensing consultations to the licensing team at the police rather than the police per se. And as Tim says, we are aware that the licensing team for North Division has been particularly stretched over the last few months. And it may be that. I don't know.
Do you think it's worth sort of giving them an extended deadline, maybe, to the end of January? Or?
I think very much, Councillor Harrison, it's worth carrying on that conversation on an ongoing basis. That there is a licensing sergeant in place there with whom Eileen's dealt with for a number of years. Our local licensing PC, who was the operational officer who dealt very well with issues within the Derbyshire Dales, hasn't been around for a period of time and hasn't yet been replaced. And I suspect that, it's not right, is it, to speculate about other people's staffing issues. But in all honesty, I suspect that's the reason why we haven't had a response. I think it is an ongoing conversation. And what I would suggest might be the best way is if you let officers have that conversation and come back to you when it's concluded with a recommendation, that might be the best way forward, rather than saying we must get it done by a certain date. I think it's an ongoing issue to get the right answer at the moment.
Okay, thank you.
Apologies for missing it. Councillor Swindell.
Thank you, Chair. It's just, I've come back maybe with some comments, but just a question for clarification, Tim. I think I heard right. With regards to the CCTV issue, I understand that you've had a low response. When you say it's not closed, I'm assuming that's something that you said would be raised with the trade when you have your meeting regarding various other matters. I mean, I appreciate that it's not going to be a case closed. We constantly review these things, which I think is wise. But I just wondered if it would be raised with the trade then, because we haven't consulted with them, have we?
You've spotted, thank you, Chair, through you. You've spotted a subtle thing there, Councillor Swindle. Thank you very much. We need to have conversations with the trade about a number of things. They've approached Eileen about potential increase in fares, which will come through this committee as well. But there are other issues in the national standards we need to move on with. The issue of CCTV, mandatory CCTV, not CCTV per se, mandatory CCTV, is the one that will cause them the most expense, and a lot of them would consider that is for very limited benefit for them or their customers. You know, the taxi trade locally, they're quite well established, and almost certainly there haven't been any problems that CCTV would help to solve. However, if you look at the issue in general, as we said, I think at the last meeting, there will come a time, probably still in my working lifetime, when CCTV in taxi is just a given, and that it will be the thing because that's what everybody accepts. So it's going to come. And I think what we'd like to do is have those meetings with the trade. I don't think we're in a position to impose on them something that they might be extremely dubious about and which might cost them money. But I think we need to tell them we are having these conversations and we may very well come back about it in the very near future. You know, there shouldn't be anything to fear in CCTV for most taxi drivers. If they're doing their jobs properly, then all it's going to record is them doing their jobs properly, which is great. It should also provide a degree of protection for them from some of the problems they face and some of the accusations that they occasionally face, which may or may not be false. So I think we need, the point for Eileen and I is we need to get on with those conversations, and we need to know what we want to say to them about mandatory CCTV during those conversations, whilst accepting that the development of that policy is an ongoing issue. Does that make sense? Yeah.
I mean, I agree that the main one people are interested in is the police, isn't it? I am slightly worried by the fact we haven't got anything from the police. I would be a lot happier. Could we contact them to get something back from them? So that, I mean, I'm sort of thinking on carrying on from Councillor Swindell's, the conversation I presume we're going to be having with taxi drivers is going to be led by the police. And I think we do, you know, there's that slightly worry is, you know, have we got no response because there's no interest in it, or did they have, you know, is it just a slipped email? You know, in a minute with no response whatsoever, it could be anything, couldn't it? I would like to see something.
I agree, Councillor Gamble. Again, it's not right to speculate on other agencies' systems and what's going on. We've not been able to have those conversations as of yet, but we will have them. As I say, Eileen, we'll talk to the licensing sergeant and see where we can take that. So if you would let us carry on that conversation, we needed to come back to this meeting and tell you what we've done. But if you let us carry on that conversation and find out what we can find out, and we'll bring that back before you when we've got some kind of answer.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to support a couple of comments that both Tim and Eileen made about continuing the conversations. The council, in inverted commas at the moment, has had some bad press lately with one thing and another. And I think the more doors we can keep open to people who earn their living through our residents generally, such as the taxi drivers, then to always have a door open for conversation. Face-to-face obviously is always better, but if it is Zoom restricted, I think it's really important that they can approach you as well, or us as well, shall I say, because that's as we know when conversations break down. And I would support Councillor Gamble's comment about it's a bit disappointing not to get anything back from the police. We do have a police and crime commissioner, Angelique Foster, I think if her surname is, and maybe her office can do something about it as well to help. Because I think it's important that we have them on our side quite promptly. Thank you, Chair.
I could just.
Sorry about that. But just a few points, really. I don't agree with what Mr. Braun said about the primary console TV and the police. I think it's the public, because a lot of crime goes lot of issues go unreported. Very much so. Very disappointed that the police haven't responded. They may very easily have a number of incidents in the Derbyshire Dales that they've failed to tell us about. So I would like you to continue with it. If in time there is any way we can do a consultation with the public, I think, because it's them that are the customers. They are the service users of the taxis. I think that there's a lot of crime that goes on, not with taxi drivers, but with people travelling with taxis. And I think that it would help if there was CCTV in vehicles. It would help to reduce crime, reduce the fear of crime, and help to prevent crime. That's where I'm at with it. But I do realise we've got to cut our cloth accordingly, if you know what I mean. I do think that we need to keep this on to the forefront, because we as an organisation don't want to be seen falling foul. And I said this last time, if there is an incident and we have dismissed this out of hand that we're not going to have it, we will be criticised. So we need to keep it current and we need to keep it real. Okay, thank you.
That's okay, through you, Chair. I mean, regarding the police, yes, and the other people that I consulted, the other statutory authorities, really, responsible authorities, I didn't chase them up. I mean, ordinarily, I may well have done, had it not been when it was. You know, middle of December was particularly busy in terms of other committee, subcommittee hearings that we thought we were going to have at the last minute. So I didn't chase the police up because I am aware as well of their restricted resources at the moment in that particular team, not across the board. But I'm happy to get back in touch with them. With regard to the public, I mean, if we go ahead, you know, if members are minded to approve the first 3 officer recommendations, one of those is to review the current taxi and PHV licensing policy. And as I've explained in my report earlier, then that would have to go out for consultation if we were going to make any changes to that statutory document or non-statutory document even. So there's an area or a section in there, or a paragraph, should I say, regarding CCTV. Currently, it tells people that the council doesn't mandate CCTV in licensed vehicles currently, but it does allow drivers to have it, as Tim explained, provided they comply with the Information Commissioner's Office rules and regulations, etc. We're going to have to, oh, we're not going to have to, but we could put something in the revised policy, the draft that goes out for consultation, to suggest that, you know, that if there is evidence of need, then people could comment, or we could just leave it as it is and wait for other people, like members of the public, to say, we note that CCTV isn't mandatory and we'd like you to consider it. Or we could give them a bit of a steer. I mean, I don't know, that's something I'd have to discuss with Tim. But they will get an opportunity to comment on the policy as a whole. It's whether or not a specific consultation on CCTV in licensed vehicles should be done separately or not, and that's what the officer recommendation is asking for members to decide how you'd like us to deal with it, really. So it's not to deny the public the right to comment on it or anything like that, or to dismiss it. It's just how we go about it without sensationalising it, for example.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, through you, Chair. Looking back through some of the licensing, there's quite a few the police haven't commented back on. So it's not something just new. There's quite a few of the licenses where they haven't commented back. Yeah.
I could be anybody you want. I am, allegedly. But yeah, I take your point. I think personally, about the police, I think each organisation has got a service level agreement that they should adhere to, and even if they just respond, thank you for your correspondence, and acknowledge the receipt, that's where I would want to be, and but they should respond. At the end of the day, the other thing is, I think as an organisation, and I like you know the point you raise about, I think if we were to not sensationalise, because we don't want to sensationalise, we don't want to make people fearful out there, but if the question goes in that consultation, you know, correctly word question, I think then we write back our sort of responsibility a little bit because we've taken reasonable steps. That's where I'd be coming from with it. So I don't know whether that's something that we can do, but I think it would be a good way forward. Thank you.
I'm disappointed that the police haven't responded, but I just wonder if there's general reticence about putting some opinion forward because they don't want to be seen as the body that has instigated this amongst the taxi drivers. So I just wondered whether there's another way of doing it, whether we can just get them as a group of people together in a meeting to just have a general discussion about it, really. And I know that's kind of what you're thinking about doing, is keeping that dialogue open, but maybe it's worth getting all the agencies together and talking it through. Just a thought.
Just a bit of information. I think Councillor Mrs. Morley raised the issue about the Police and Crime Commissioner. Well, the push for this county-wide has come from the PCC's office. And she wrote, and it is Angelique Foster, she wrote to all the local authorities and said she'd like them to look at this issue, which is where it's why it came forward at the time it came forward rather than why it came forward at all. So we as officers are not aware of a range of incidents that anybody has said, that someone such as the police has said to us, it would be really helpful if all the taxis had CCTV in them, but we thought we needed to have that conversation specifically. We did it in a consultation sense with a closing date because we wanted to get something for this committee. We wanted to go forward with the conversations with the taxi drivers. But I think it is an ongoing conversation. I think the first instance we need to get hold of the licensing team and have a chat with them about this specific issue and take it forward. When we've got that, we'll come back here. I would suggest we come back here, we tell you what those opinions are, and we work out a way forward from there. As I say, I'm sure this will come over a period of time. It's just a question of when. The points Councillor Wayne raised, for goodness sake, can't get your name right at all. Councillor Wayne raised about people using taxis, county lines issues, for example, using taxis to transport drugs around the county, are very valid, and we might disagree about who might be the best people to speak about, because I still think the police would provide the best information in relation to that. But it's right, isn't it? It will be happening to some degree because that's what happens, sadly, in the world today. And if it would help the police to investigate those issues, I'd be all for getting that installed. But we need to have those I think we need to have something to base our opinions on in order to tell the taxi drivers you're going to have to do this. And I don't think we're there right now in the conversations that Eileen wants to have at the end of this month. I mean, that's really where I'm coming from. I'd like to come back to you hopefully for the next meeting with an updated view and work out how we move forward on that. I'd like to tell the taxi drivers at the end of this month, we are considering this issue. It probably will come. You better get ready for it, kind of thing. That seems to me to be a sensible way forward this month now until the next meeting.
Thank you, Chair. It is an interesting debate, isn't it? Because you can sort of interpret things very differently on all sides. I'm disappointed the police haven't come back, but you could ask yourself, have they not come back because it's not setting in alarm bells off? If there was an issue with problems in taxis, crime and so on in taxis, would they not have immediately jumped and thought, this is a brilliant idea, this is something that we need to support and get back on? I'm just trying to look at it from different standpoints. But I'm confident with this because what I'm hearing from our officers, and I trust what they're saying, that they're going to continually review it, they're going to continually have discussions with the trade. And I agree with 2 points that Tim sort of mentions, and one, that this is going to end up being something that's going to come in, I think, nationwide. I think it'll be something that will be mandatory eventually. And if not, I'm trying to think, if I set up a taxi company in my own private hire vehicle, I would want CCTV in there, because if somebody attacked me, caused damage to my vehicle, or attacked somebody else in the vehicle, I would want that CCTV in there. So I think this is something that's going to happen organically as well. Maybe those that's been in the trade a bit longer will not want to take it on. Some of them are so set in their ways in a nice way. And then I think those that are new to the trade that come in will perhaps be advised, or may may want it themselves. So I'm quite happy with that the conversation is taking place. It's continually reviewed, and the discussions will carry on. So I am confident with it. But I also think that our licensing team, perhaps if there had been, I know Councillor Wayne says, and from his experience I take it, that a lot of crime does go unreported. But surely if there had been an incident in a taxi, somebody would be ringing this council up and saying, there was an incident in that taxi, that private hire vehicle, do you have CCTV, or how can I take it further? So I'm sure if there was a big issue, our licensing team would also be would have alarm bells ringing. So I'm comfortable with this, and I look forward to it progressing down the line. Thank you.
I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be awkward. I'm just asking what we've voted on. I'm a bit conscious there's a recommendation 4 here that just says the committee's views are sought. Do we need to have a clarification of what those views are? Or
Can I suggest something at this point, if I may, which is that the licensing team carry on conversations with statutory agencies and report back to the next appropriate meeting of this committee with the results of those conversations to determine whether we should go out to public consultation.
yeah, we do. Yeah, just a bit of extra emphasis on that. We will get hold of the police. I think I know Councillor Swindell says it might be that we're not interested, but we've been over Christmas period.
Yeah.
Emails go astray. Something very simple could have just easily happened, and the right person who needed to see that email, just didn't see it.
Yeah. I'm very happy with that. If we've got that down.
Chair, it goes along what I was saying, Chair, about continuing dialogue. That's what I want. Yeah. Please don't read anything into the fact I'm presenting this, members. It's just that there's maths involved. Well, it used to be maths in the day. It's a spreadsheet now. You might remember we talked about new requirements where the operators of residential mobile home sites, you would say it, have to be tested to determine that they're fit and proper persons in order to run those sites. One of the things we talked about was the fact that in order to introduce a fee, as we're allowed to for that service,
we had to have a fees policy. We had to introduce a fees policy. Well, this report introduces that policy. Because it is a policy, it has to be referred on to council following the decision of this meeting, assuming that you vote to approve it. And in particular, it introduces the fee itself. And what we've done is we've gone through the guidance provided by government as to what we can charge for. We've apportioned times to each of those functions, and we've determined which people within Eileen's team in the main and the environmental health team, when it comes to inspection, will carry out those functions. The reason that the appendix was delayed in getting to you is we needed confirmation of the hourly rates of all those people. I can do the maths and work it out from their wages, but we need to check that we don't charge them out anything different. And the fees that we've come up with are £240 for the application fee and £115 for the annual fee. And you'll see that some of that relates to inspections of the sites to make sure that they're properly safe. Those fees are on the low side as compared to other Derbyshire authorities. We've been around and checked against others. Some authorities do charge a commercial rate. We don't. We charge a flat hourly rate. What I can assure you is that we are covering all the legitimate costs of the authority, including on costs. So we're covering the wages of the team involved, and we had 23% for national insurance, superannuation, and so on and so forth. So those are the fees that are before you. I'm happy to take any questions, of course, but if you're happy with those, they'll be referred on to, or the policy itself will be referred on to council for formal approval. We've had a look at other authorities' fees. There is a neighbouring authority who's charging out officers at £57 per hour. I can assure you we don't pay our officers that, don't pay me that. Our assumption is they're charging. Back in the day when building control was in-house, I used to charge out our building control officers at a commercial rate. You would expect to pay within the market, which more than covered their wages and brought in a surplus. Well, you're not actually allowed to do that under this legislation. You're allowed to charge your legitimate costs. You're not allowed to make a surplus on them. We've obeyed the letter of the law, and we've come up with a fee that covers the time that we anticipate the various different officers taking to undertake these functions. We've double-checked that with our salaries team, and we've triple-checked it with the finance team, so we know that the amounts that we're charging in terms of hourly rates are correct. We're not going to lose on it. We're not going to make money on it. They may be subject to challenge, I would suggest.
Yeah, so just as a chair, local government law is a joy and complicated, but there is a general rule that if you charge out for any service, you can't make a profit on that unless there is statutory power to do so. If you're comparing other local authorities, we're a very small local authority. We have a small building. Our overheads potentially are lower. Staff costs might be lower than other authorities as well. So even though it's a benchmarking, without knowing the rates of pay, their overheads and everything else like that, you can't really do a complete like-for-like. So those are some of the reasons why they could potentially be charging more.
The first fee, when you first apply, the fee is £240. The next year, it's the £115.